A few years back, I spent time watching TEDx videos, watching people walk onto a stage like this one, speaking clearly, confidently, as if their words belonged there. And the whole time, I had the same thought. I could never be on that stage. Not because I didn't want to be, but because I was convinced that I wasn't that kind of person. That I wasn't born with whatever it takes to stand in front of an audience and speak without my voice shaking or my mind going blank. And if I'm being honest, it wasn't just public speaking. It was anything that didn't come easily. I think most of you have experienced a similar moment at least once in your lives. You try something new, something unfamiliar, and when it doesn't come easily, you can't help but think, maybe this just isn't for me. Maybe I'm just not talented enough. And what's interesting is how quickly we accept that thought. We don't test it, we don't question it, we just let it define what we try next and what we avoid. And over time, those small decisions build something bigger. You avoid one thing, then another, and before you realize it, you've built a version of your life around things you were never actually bad at, just things you didn't stay with long enough. But what if that thought isn't true? What if talent isn't something you're born with, but something you build? After observing myself and the people around me, I started noticing that we treat talent like it's fixed, like it's something we either have or we don't. But in reality, it's developed through what we repeatedly choose to do. Talent is a pursued interest, and we have our brain's biology as proof. This is where neuroplasticity comes in, our brain's ability to reorganize itself based on growth. Our brains aren't fixed, they're quietly reshaping themselves in the background. If we think of the brain like a vast connected power grid, there are billions of pathways lighting up every time we think, feel, or do something. Some of these pathways are well-traveled. These are your habits, your default thoughts, your automatic reactions. And every time you repeat them, you strengthen them. They become faster, easier, and more natural. But the moment you try something new, think differently, act differently, or respond differently, you begin carving a new path. At first, it's weak, unfamiliar, uncomfortable, it doesn't feel like you. But if you keep going, if you keep choosing that new path, your brain starts to adapt. The pathway becomes stronger, and as for the old one, it slowly becomes obsolete. That process of strengthening new connections and letting old ones fade is neuroplasticity. And it's happening all the time, whether we're aware of it or not. At its core, our brains are made up of billions of cells called neurons, which form connections, synapses. And every thought you have activates a pattern between these neurons. If you think, I can do this, you build one pattern. If you think, I'm not good enough, you build another. And whichever one you repeat becomes easier. It becomes natural and more like you. It's like walking through grass. At first, there's no path. But the more you walk the same way every day, you create a clear trail. And eventually, you stop choosing the direction. You just follow it. That's what your thoughts do. Your brain changes based on what you practice, so the thoughts you repeat today are building the brain you'll use tomorrow. Which means the way you think is shaping who you become. And that leads to something deeper. We like to believe our identity is fixed, that this is just who we are. But a lot of what we call identity is just repetition, repeated thoughts, repeated behaviors, repeated choices. So if your brain rewires based on repetition, then the real question is, what are you repeating about yourself? Because if you keep telling yourself that you're not capable, your brain will make that feel true. However, if you stay with something long enough, even while doubting yourself, you begin building a different pattern, a different identity. Which means the person you want to become is not something distant. It's something you're already wiring thought by thought, action by action. Just a few neural firings away. There's a story that changed the way I think about this, the story of George Danzig. When he was a graduate student, he once walked into a statistics class late. On the board were 2 problems. He assumed they were homework, so he copied them down. That night, he sat down to solve them, and they were difficult, much harder than usual. He struggled, got stuck, came back to them again, but eventually he solved them. And a few days later, handed them in thinking he was just catching up on an overdue assignment. No big realization, no dramatic moment, just homework. 6 weeks later, however, his professor told him those weren't homework problems. Those were 2 of the most famous problems in statistics, unsolved problems. And he had solved them, simply because he didn't know he wasn't supposed to be able to, so he never gave himself a reason to stop. He later became one of the most famous mathematical scientists of his time. I've seen this in my own life too. When I first started playing the piano, it didn't feel natural at all. It was slow, repetitive, and frustrating. I would repeat the same passages over and over again, and it still wouldn't sound the way I wanted it to. And after a while, it stops being about the music. It becomes about doubt. You start thinking, other people get this faster than me. Maybe I just started too late. Maybe this just isn't for me. And that's the moment where most people quit. Not because they can't improve, but because they decide they can't. But if you stay, even when it's slow, and even when it's uncomfortable, something starts to change. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but gradually. Your hands move differently, and your mind processes faster. And one day, you do something that once felt impossible, even without thinking about it. And it's not about music, not just music. With dancing, speaking, studying, confidence, anything, it starts the same way. Uncomfortable, uncertain, and imperfect. But people who improve, they don't stop there. They stay, and that's the difference. We see the result, but not the process behind it. We see someone being talented, but what we don't see is how long they stayed with something before it started to look that way. So take something you've been avoiding, something you've decided you're not good at, and try it again, but this time with a new mindset. Not judging yourself for struggling, not expecting it to be easy, just staying with it a little longer than you normally would. Staying through the discomfort and staying through the doubt. Because I wouldn't be standing here today if I let the first thought, the one telling me I wasn't naturally talented at public speaking, decide what I was capable of. Talent isn't something you're born with. It's something you build through repetition, effort, and persistence. It's the interest you choose to keep going with even when it doesn't come easily at first. Talent is a pursued interest. Thank you.